Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for introducing me. I'm really happy that everybody here showed up, and I'm also really happy to demo Periscope for everyone. A little bit about Periscope. I was developing live view applications for a shop here in Columbus, and I was frustrated by some of the repetitive work that I had to do on that front. So, for example, I noticed a lot of developers had this problem where they would go into an app. They would go into an app, and when they went into it, they would do something like this. You can probably see, let me make sure. Okay, yeah, you can see that all right. Um, you can probably see here uh, this website. This is an app I'm working on for doing flashcards. It's very, very basic. It's just a toy app. But what I see developers doing is they would come in like this, and they would copy large chunks of HTML. And upon copying the HTML, they would then go to VS Code and search for it. And the point of doing that was to find out what module is being shown. Trying to find out which module this code is on so you can start editing the page, which is horribly inefficient. Now, developers who are a little bit more savvy, and you can all see my Emacs here, who are a little bit more savvy would come in and go to the router. See? Let me find the correct router here. So they would come in and they would go to the router, right? So they come in, they go to router, and then they go, okay, this URL, we have localhost 4000, and it's just /dex12 show, and dex is an ID. So we've got dex, deck ID show. Okay, here's the module. And then they go to the module, right? So they go to deck live.index, and then they find show, or they go to deck live. Let me find it. Excuse me. As always, things don't work out right when you're just about to show them. Show.ex, here we go. And then we see we have decklive.show, and this is where they would come to edit things. And then from here, maybe you could find the corresponding view. Deck live show Heeks, and then we could come here to edit things. So suppose you want to see the socket. The way that we would probably do that is we come into our mount function, have the socket here. Well, not mount because that only runs once, but maybe say our event handler. And see, already this is getting complicated because do we go to handle params? Do we want to go to our event handler? Where do we go to stick an IO inspect and look at the socket? Where do we go to do that? And that just creates all kinds of difficulty that doesn't need to be there. So there's this long process of you come here, you look at the URL or maybe at the code, you come over here, you look in the router, you find the module name, and then you come over here and you finally find the module, and then you type in io.inspect. Or rather, you spend 10 minutes scrolling through the code like this, looking at the different functions, going, okay, where do I stick my probe? Where do I put my IO inspect? And it's just a very long, arduous process, and I thought that needs to be automated. So I automated it. And the way I did that was with Periscope. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the flashy part first, the part everyone likes, because this is imported as a dependency on this project, and it's used by many companies. If you look up Elixir Periscope on GitHub, you'll find it has 50-something stars. There's quite a few different shops using this already. We go periscope.socket. Boom. And I will just go ahead and enlarge my terminal here. Type periscope.socket, and hey, look at that. There's the socket. And the nice thing is that you don't have to do that whole arduous process because this will just grab whatever socket is in the currently running live view and show it to you. Moreover, this function actually returns a socket struct. It actually returns a socket struct. So you can treat it as a socket struct. So you can go periscope.socket.assigns and get the assigns. Okay, I want to see the deck size assign, let's say. I can go periscope.socket .assigns.deck size 3. So no more of this typing in, no more of this looking at the URL, go to the router, go to the controller, and then look for a place to put an inspect. You just type periscope.socket, boom. And I like to go into my iex.exs. I think I have one in this library. And put in, go ahead and put in import Periscope. So that way, if I restart this, I can just type socket and it's imported. And I like to have this. Whenever I'm on a LiveView project or starting a new one with a new group of people, doing a contract, anything like that, the first thing I do is import Periscope and show them how to use it, because not so much to toot my own horn. Very often I don't even say that I'm the one who designed it, but because it's useful, because I've gotten to the point where I don't want to develop without this tool. Now, one of the other things that Periscope can do, if I just go exports Periscope to show you the API here, I can put all live views, and that shows we've only got one. You might be asking, why would there be more than one? Well, let's say that we open another tab. Okay, so now we've got two. We've got this one here and this one here. So now I can go to all live views and see that this is open in two tabs. And in fact, Socket, if you look at the code for Periscope, Socket actually there are two clauses, because it's an arity 1 function, but socket index defaults to 0, which creates a 0 arity clause that is called when you just type socket. So if I go socket 0, I get the first one. But if I go socket 1, I get the second one. And it's in the same order I open these tabs. So, if I just click my little back button here, and then I go all live views, we've got one is decklive.show and one is decklive.index. So I can juggle both of these. And now the way that this works, I'll just go ahead and shrink this back down. The way that this works is, you have to understand that in Elixir, everything is on the beam. Everything that you care about, besides your database and any external APIs you're calling or any external utilities you're using, the only things that you care about when you're developing Elixir code outside of maybe your DB and your Postgres is on the beam. Everything's on the beam. So when I was solving this issue, and I thought to myself, well, wait, what's a way that I could see the current socket without having to search for it and put it in and inspect? I thought, well, it's got to be on the beam somewhere. Somewhere on the beam, there is a live view that has all this information that I want. So I went and looked around online, and this code actually is mostly copied from some stuff a few other people have done, where they've retrieved all the live view processes. But that was for the purpose of explaining how the Phoenix dashboard works. It was not for the purpose I used it for. My insight here, or the key to it really, was to take all the live view PIDs, get the PIDs for all the live view processes, and then use sys.getState to actually get the contents. In component states, this little private function, what it's doing is actually mapping sys.getState over the entire list of live view PIDs. So it's getting the state for all of the PIDs that contain live views. Remember, in just a little bit of basic Erlang stuff for people who are maybe not familiar. In Erlang, everything runs in a process on the beam, and an Erlang beam process is not the same as an OS process. An Erlang process is something that is started on the beam and is subject to the scheduler that the beam uses. And every live view that we use runs in something called a gen server, which is an OTP concept. And each gen server that runs a live view lives in its own process. So if you go through these processes, you look at the info and you just dig down. You can use process.info to get a list of info. You take the first item of that list with head, and that's always going to be a tuple. You take the second element of that tuple, since it's 0 indexed, 1 gives you the second element, and then you do initial call, right? And that in turn is going to give you some more tuples that you can filter to get only the ones that have this as their first element. And those are the processes that are running live views. So then we take all those processes, because this just returns PIDs, right? So like if I go live view PIDs, I'll show you. It just shows the process identifiers. Those are not the actual processes. Those are just their addresses. sys.getState gives us the contents. That's saying, okay, here's the address. Let's go to the house and see what's in there. Then what we're doing is we're coming in with all sockets. And what this is doing is it takes component states, this private function, and it's going to pull the socket out of the component state. So if you take sys.getState, return the state, and then take socket, that's going to give you the socket. And then we're going to do enum.withIndex to generate a map. Or rather to generate a set of I believe it's a keyword list, and then enum.into to turn it into a map. So what we come back out to with that is I go all sockets, and that gives us all the sockets. 0 to list to this one, 1 goes to that one. And then when finally, when we call socket, we're just doing map.get, which that's actually bad syntax. I wrote this when I was fairly early in Elixir. That should really be done a little differently. But we're doing all sockets, socket index. And since that defaults to 0 for the 0 arity version of this function, that's going to return the very first one. So and usually you're only running 1, right? Usually you don't have 2 tabs open. So for the most part, all you need is socket. And you go boom, and it gives you that. And there you go. You have access to your assigns. And that eliminates a huge amount of work. Now, there's other things that we can use. So, for example, we can go which live view, and this will tell us what module is running. So if we really want to go to that module and mess with it, just seeing the socket isn't enough. Which live view says, hey, this is in noeticardsweb.decklive.index. Okay, so we would go ahead and find that right here. And now we can look at, what's going on, right? And then if I come over here and I click show, then I can come down here and go, okay, which live view am I at now? Okay, now we're in the Noeticards Web Deck Live show. So I can do that. And again, this is all this is all meant to save time, and this is all meant to make development easier and take out some of the drudgery. To continue a little bit, a lot of assigns that you're working with in LiveView are going to hide in the components, because components, as we know as LiveView developers, can be stateful in LiveView, meaning they can track their own state, have their own assigns. So this socket.assigns, as handy as it is, isn't always going to give you what you want, because sometimes the assign you want is hiding in a component. Well, is there some way to dig down into it and get the components? And there you can. This function, component names, is meant to pop the hood on that. Because if I go component names, I see I have no components running, right? But then if I do this, the add a card component, I go component names. Oh, hey, look, we have a component running now. And this would show all the components. And I want to say what assigns are on there. Well, you go assigns 4, that's for pulling assigns off components. And you have autocomplete, since that's the module name. So Noeticards Web, excuse me, got that wrong. Deck Live, add card component. Oh, hey, and look at that. Now we've got all the assigns to that component. And this is a component that has a form in it, so it has a few different things. For example, it has the change set here. It has the action that has triggered that component. It has any of the changes we've made. And this is all normal for a form component because change sets are how we expose or how we use forms in LiveView and in Phoenix more generally. It has the ID of the deck that these flashcards are in. It has the title, and it also has the return to. Because this is a modal, it has to know where it's going to when you click that X, and this will show as part of the component as well. So assigns for name of component shows us all that. So if you've got a form component, assigns for no edit cards web dot decklive dot add card component dot change set. That's very useful for seeing, you know, what's going on in there. And if you want to see what it already looks like, if I go no edit cards web, you know, you could also do dot change set dot data and see the actual card struct there. So there's lots of stuff that you can use here to make development easier. And also, if you have a bunch of components open, then of course component names will show you everything. It will show you everything, all of the active components. So for example, if I just open this, say I just copy and paste here, and then I do this again, names, you see we have 2 copies of this open. So there's a lot of different stuff here. There's also some experimental stuff that I've been working with. Part of it is like this live views to paths. And what this does is it gives you the module names and then shows you all of the paths that link to that. One problem that I have had before with stuff like mix phx.routes, like if you're an Elixir developer, you've done this before. You've probably mix phx.routes, and then you see all these routes. Now, this is a very small program, so there's not a ton of routes here, but this can very quickly get huge. And if you've dealt with a mature application, you know that the router can grow to absurd lengths. And this is a way around that. Live views to paths basically isolates only those routes that link to live views as opposed to other things, as opposed to anything else you might link to. And then just for each module gives you the paths that go to that module. So this is more of a quick reference. It's kind of a shorthand, and it gives you sort of a Cliff Notes version for only the live view side of things. So there's a lot going on here. There's a few other things that I'm working on, and some of these functions are more experimental. Some of this stuff, like this, will only work for certain architectures, for certain directory setups. If your project architecture is a little different, this might not work, but usually it will tell you the name of the application, which can be used in other places. But what I'm working on now, sort of the next step in this project, is going to be socket.watch. So the idea there is that we spawn a process, probably with start link or something like that, that watches a socket. And every time an assign changes, it would print a diff showing, hey, here's what the assign did look like, and here's what it looks like now. Maybe colorize it to make it easy to read. So what that will do is make it much easier to check what an assign is doing. So if you want to see what's going on when you type here, if maybe this has a change event on it, and you have an event handler that's firing every time it changes, that changes some other assign, then you would see that assign changing in your terminal every time you typed something, and that would be part of socket.watch. The way that I plan to accomplish that is using polling. So the idea is I would spawn a process. And after I spawn the process, that process would loop. And it would sleep probably for about 100 milliseconds. So 10 times a second, it would ask for the socket again. It would run periscope.socket and do a diff. And if there's no diff, then it just sleeps again. If there is a diff, then it prints the diff. So using polling, there would be a way to do that. Now, I understand that there's probably some point in the live view behavior that gets hit every time an assign changes, but that is deep magic. That is something I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to do it that way, since polling is pretty lightweight anyhow. I don't think it would be a huge problem to just use polling as opposed to looking for the point in the live view behavior. But that is kind of a stretch goal for that. So that is what I have so far. As far as Periscope goes, what it does and what I have planned for it. Uh, some some other possible paths are for example, adding some shorthand for schema stuff. So maybe finding some way to retrieve all the schemas in the project and then making it easy to make requests. The reason for that is that frequently I find myself opening PSQL, like coming in here and going PSQL-U Postgres, and then, trying to find my table, or trying to list tables. Okay, which one am I on? No edit cards. There, hang on, let me scroll down. And it does waste a certain amount of time looking for your table and then trying to make queries and going select blah from blah. It's just a waste of time, or it takes longer than it should. So one possible path forward for Periscope would also be for it to give you some information about the backend, give you some information about the database side of things. And a few things that it could do is maybe get all the schemas in the project, get all the modules that have schema in the name, or that find some way of isolating the schemas, because not everybody names their modules with schema. I think that they all implement a schema behavior, however, because if I come here, freshen up a little bit, because if I come here, yeah, it looks like, yes, they all alias either, whoops, that's not the schema. I keep mine in a schema folder, but not everyone does that. So for example, they have to either use ecto.schema or use a defined schema behavior. So you could look for anything that is use blah.schema and use that to isolate all of the schemas. And then once you have all the schema modules, it would be helpful maybe to build some kind of a tool that lets you do the database queries that you would normally have to build queries for. Because I find myself a lot of the time going, okay, I need to grab the first card struct out of the database and look at it. So I go repo.all cards.card card schemas.card and pipe that into head to pull out a card struct. So maybe something that just pulls a random, or pulls the first out of the database, because I find myself doing that a lot, might be helpful, and that might also find its way into Periscope eventually. So there's a lot of different options here. There's a lot of ways I could go, and I'm also open to suggestions. If anybody has anything that they would like to see Periscope do, I'd be more than happy to oh, good grief, where'd y'all go? I know I have you open here somewhere. Ah, there it is. So, if there is anything that you guys would like to see in Periscope, or any functionality that would be useful to us as LiveView and Elixir developers, feel free to suggest it and just throw something out in the chat. And because, automating things that are repetitive tasks that developers don't want to deal with is a big part of what I do, and a big part of my motivation. And if I can work, if it's at least vaguely relevant to what I'm doing with Periscope, then I'd be more than happy to take a crack at it and see if it can be done. So, for all that being said, I think I'm a bit early. I know we were going to go on a little bit longer, but I think I run a bit short here. So I think I'll cede the floor now, if that's okay, and we can do any questions or final thoughts.
Sure. So maybe one that came up to my mind when you were talking about investigating was the state of the active sockets. I was just thinking that's something that can also be a next step in inspecting the states of the components, in my view. Might be something like that you hover over a part of the page where, for instance, you have a form and you have the capability of clicking some kind of a button which opens a model inside of which you can see the state of the given component on the page, so that it can be even visually uh, it can be a visual aspect added to this what you already have. Although I think it's a different type of implementation that has to be done here, because in this case you probably would like to pin into the render function itself to add this kind of a button somewhere there, instead of trying to identify which part of HTML is actually connected to the given socket on the in the registry. So that's one idea I had in mind. But the second question, so as far as I understand, is Periscope should be like a general purpose library for automating some of the stuff that are common to do, that you commonly do during the development, right? So it's not only about the live view, but generally speaking, the things that you would normally try to do in development.
Right, those and especially those things which are related to observability. Like what are things that I have to do over and over just to see what's happening in my program that that I that I don't necessarily want to do over and over again, or that can be automated. And this is that is definitely something that I've thought about, the visual side of things. And in fact, just to kind of riff on that, one thing I've considered, and you reminded me of this, is trying to add Periscope's functionality to the live view dashboard or to the Phoenix dashboard, because Phoenix does ship with a dashboard that is developer facing, that gives you some observability and some introspection and insight into the app, but it does not give you sockets the way Periscope does. So if I could build a GUI for Periscope and incorporate that possibly into Phoenix Live, or into the Phoenix dashboard rather, then that would definitely be something I could do, something helpful. Uh, and I think that would make it easier to use. I, as a developer, am someone who really likes to stay in the terminal almost 100% of the time. You guys probably saw the Emacs there, and I know upon seeing Emacs, a few people probably recoiled, like, no, get that away from me. But as you can see, I do almost everything from the terminal. But a lot of people aren't like that. Some people want a GUI. And writing a GUI into the Phoenix dashboard would probably be a good idea. I think at this point, it's definitely it's definitely not something that hasn't been suggested before. I mean, it's definitely and it's on the menu right now. One of the big challenges also with Periscope is getting these things under test because of the kind of library it is. It's very difficult to test. It's very difficult to make sure to write unit tests for something like Periscope.socket, because you have to spin up a live view process and then run the function and then make sure the function is returning what's actually in the process. And it's just it's a tangle. It's a little bit difficult to get under test, but that's also a second thing that's on sort of on the menu. As far as a GUI, you said you would like to have something that is on the page. So you mean maybe something in the development environment that lets you click, like maybe a browser extension, perhaps?
Maybe not even a browser extension, but if you can just integrate it into what's being returned as an HTML to the client of the browser. I mean, just integrate it with the web app, so that whenever you have a Phoenix Live View component rendered on the page, this component would have somewhere added a button saying show the state, for instance. if you hover over it. And once you click on it, you can see the state of the component. And that idea popped up to my mind because I think that would solve the problem with having a multiple tabs opened. Because in this case, you'd be able to see exactly what's the state of the component on the tab you're currently on. And for that to work, you would have to make this button a part of what's rendered as a Phoenix component instead of trying to search in the Periscope what could be the state I'm looking at right now. So it would have to be rendered as a part of the component. So the challenge here is to find a way how to actually add something on top of render in Phoenix component. Yeah.
Okay, and of course the render, I mean, I believe that's probably a behavior that's written, the Phoenix component behavior probably includes render, so that would basically mean extending Phoenix in order to do that, which is not out of the question, right? I mean, if I add something to the Phoenix dashboard, that is, in sort of a less fundamental sense, an extension of Phoenix as well. So yeah, no, I'm open to the idea of possibly extending Phoenix to build this into it, and I think especially as more people begin to use it, that will become more and more of a viable option because it's going to be needed. It's the kind of thing that probably Phoenix should ship with, to be honest. But in order for that to work out, it should probably be both under test and, like you say, have some of these extensions that make it fit more naturally. Because you're right, to look for things in the terminal and just tab through and type names, that for a lot of people that feels very arduous, and we would prefer to be able to click something we can just see on the page. So, and not just like Go Phoenix Live dashboard, because you're still, I think what you're homing in on is you're still looking for the state. There's still this process of which state am I looking at? I have access to all the state now, but which state am I seeing? And being able to pinpoint the state instantly would that would be the extension of Phoenix that we're looking for. So yeah, I think that expanding it past being a live view observability tool and into being like an overall Phoenix tool would also definitely be helpful. And in that case, you know, it might stand to reason that I should change the API. Maybe periscope.socket should be periscope.liveviewsocket. And that's still on the table because I haven't, if you look at the semantic versioning on this, I have not released version 1.0. So major changes to the API are still very much a possibility.
All right, I still feel like terminal version is still a viable option here and useful. But I was just thinking about how to solve the issue that you mentioned, having a couple of tabs open, a couple of users logging into the terminal. The server. And in this case, you would have to try to with the Periscope terminal version, it would be hard, I assume, maybe I'm wrong, to find the state for the given user. I mean, the components
Right.
of the state for the given user I'm looking at right now. That's what I was thinking of. All right, let me open the Q&A for a moment. And if you have any questions to Caleb or suggestions, maybe how he can improve the library because he asked for it, then feel free to do it. Yeah.
Right, definitely. I'm totally open to any suggestions that anyone might have. Again, observability is the general idea here because that's what Periscope is for. So if things aren't observability based, it might be out of scope. But generally speaking, anything that involves observability, introspection, looking into the function of the beam is probably in scope for this project.